Welcome to the Org Design Podcast. Thank you for joining us. I'm here, Tim Brewer, one of our co-hosts, and Amy's joining me as well. We have the pleasure today of having Andreas Wenger on the call with us. Andreas, welcome. I'm going to give a bit of an intro. We got to meet each other in Milan for the EODF conference, which is amazing, really good fun. You are one of the partners at Transformer Consulting. So we're going to get you to tell a little bit more about that on the show today. And you're joining from Zurich, Switzerland.
Yes, I do. Hi, Amy. Hi, Tim. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this talk.
We start this question on the podcast often, which is, how did you end up in org design? Can you tell us a little bit about the story about your journey to doing org design full time?
Actually, it's an interesting question because I must say I started with organization science, let's say it like that, with structures already in my studies. I did a study on the development of organizational structures of big companies. And then I followed up on that in my PhD, where I did also on the design of big and complex organizational structures, but it was purely academic at this point of time. So the question now is interesting. How did I morph into what this organization design called normally? And that actually happened in two steps, I would say. The first one is that I started to work for a consulting company, Immersive Management Consulting, which is called today Oliver Wyman. And there we had some nice projects in Germany. Most of all, it was in the energy sector. At that time, there was a liberalization going on, and those companies, they started to discover their clients. So you had really to transform everything in the organic structure. You did all the processes, the operating model, and at the end, you ended up with the cost structure and with the incentives. And this gave me really a very nice feeling on how you can integrate, or you need to integrate all those aspects to get something that is really working at the end. And with this experience in consulting, I went on in similar projects, but the last point was when I really got into management for some years. I was responsible for international development of a bigger company, and I had to work and to manage and to decide on that. And there I really realized how important it is that you get those things together. And ever since, I believe that organization design has a lot of potential and value for management, but also for consulting.
What are the kinds of symptoms that you expect to see from a poor org design? And what is some of the funny or crazy things that you've seen over the years walking into organizations and talking to leaders about their org structures?
Yeah, probably one of the things you could say is that there is many times which people talk about organization structure, but in the end, they mean management, or they mean leadership, that the problem lies somewhere else. But the structure is something that they can grasp somehow. It's clear you can produce an org chart and then you can see something. And leadership is maybe not that nicely definable. You cannot define it in the same way as you can organization structure. So that happens sometimes, that there is somebody reaches out and says, I have this and that problem, and then we find out it goes a bit farther, or there's another main point that we have to tackle. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about those projects I did, and one I did especially was really keeps staying there, and it comes back and back again when I have to think about it. It's a story that started before COVID, and it's in an institution that is looking after people with polyhandicaps. I don't know in relation to other countries, but for our country, it's quite a big one. It's like maybe 250 people that are looked after. A bit more of that full-time equivalents of people that are really in the administration, but most of all in the accompaniment of those persons. And it's you asked why they came to me, and actually it was really an old organizational structure who dated like 50 years. And it was built around a company or institution at that time who was basically looking after children. It was looking after children who had those polyhandicaps. And in those 50 years, what happened is that actually the people that they were looking after has changed. So their customers, in brackets, customers, have changed. Now they have more than 2/3 are adult and the rest are children. And they have doubled the size of people too. They have had a classical functional organization chart. So with specialties like accompaniment, schooling, care, and therapies and stuff like that. At the top of the organization, they were overwhelmed by the work they had to do because everything, it's a classical of a functional organization who cannot cope anymore. You normally do that for one product or one service company, and suddenly you had more complexity, more problems to solve, and everything ended up at the top of the hierarchy. So we started quite a thorough process, which was very interesting because actually normally you go out in organization design, you talk with people, with the customers. What do you want? And there in this situation, you couldn't go out to the customers and ask, what do you want?
Mm.
So we had to spend really a lot of time trying to figure out what their needs were and how we could respond in the organization, this socio-technical system on their needs. And a really thorough process became more self-managed on the top, getting rid of the functional stuff and then morphing into customer oriented. Now comes the interesting point, and that's why I'm going back to it often again in my thoughts, is the going live was actually planned for April 2020. And we tend to forget, but in 2020, there was a major problem. And you can imagine such an institution with fragile customers, which are really is very prone just to get in trouble. So they were scared to change so fundamentally an organization. And actually, they did it. They did it because they thought if we just stay like that, we will end up having more troubles in the organization. We cannot cope with such a complicated situation where everything goes to the top and we have to decide. And after the first way, they implemented it, and the result was amazing. I went back to them to talk to them. I followed them up, and they told me, yes, if they wouldn't have done it, it would have been so complicated to really survive this crisis. With the new organization, they were really able just to take the decisions at the basis, to really organize their work in small families and small groups of customers and of people who are looking after them. If I think back now, I think it's a perfect situation to demonstrate that sometimes when it comes to go live of a situation, of a new organization, we're afraid. There's fear or worries are around. They're probably not explicit, they're implicit somewhere. But we tend to find strategies just to prevent certain things to happen if we go live, because the old is still strong and the new things are still theoretical somehow. And then you find situations, you work on the details, you try to optimize all the solutions before you do something. You start to discuss a lot, give it a try, and to find the courage also, just to take the step and start to implement, and without having all the solutions, because reality tends to change anyway. And we have to face the fact that as individuals, if we have something new, we can only really adapt and find out how it's going to be if we expose ourselves to such a situation. So exposition to a new system helps really. It's the only way actually just to do away with our fears, also with worries that we have in such a strong situation. And for me, it's also thinking if they were able to do it in a such difficult situation, why shouldn't we be able?
Yeah, it's super interesting and an inherently complex situation to change or high impact. We talk about leaders looking at big changes in their organization. How do you help people get over that? What are the kind of practical things a leader can do in their organization when they can see a case for change, they see the need for it, but they're acknowledging, hey, this is going to be really high impact. This may impact specific individuals and their work. Yeah. How do you help them work through those high impact situations?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things I really believe in is that if you have the chance just to spend some time really preparing the solution, then that's an important piece of the puzzle. If you just go in and then you try just to know everything better or just to do it in a small circle, it's complicated because it's maybe crowdsourcing is not the right correct term to think about it. But if you have more people just who are really in it and then also start really believing in a situation, you will never be able to find out everything and to define everything. And it doesn't help neither because you just get lost in tactics. You lose the big plan somehow. And if you have really time just to develop this story and conviction of something that will happen in the story that will unfold in the future, that helps a lot, I think. And then what also helps, I think, is our examples, actually, just to illustrate as the example I told you, if I can go out and reach out and then I tell them stories, and then it's like everywhere you realize that common sense. Normally, a lot of things are common sense, and then you just have to see that others are also doing it, also failure, you can overcome it. So I really believe that getting involved and then really also having a story to believe in is a good way just to help in those situations.
Yeah, I can't remember, Amy. It was one of someone said to us, if you don't invest in conviction or don't get people to that point of belief, which you talk about, so that they have conviction around a change, you'll end up either paying the price or having to invest into conviction, or you'll have to invest into convincing. And always convincing is harder. Like convincing everyone post a decision when they're all trying to block it. And I think that's a really good lesson for leaders to think about when leading change, that they're much better developing a conviction from within their team than having to spend all their time convincing through and beyond past the end of the change.
I'd love to dig a bit more into which step of the process, Andreas. So it sounds like you were talking a lot about maybe once a design is chosen, having people involved in all the aspects of bringing it to life and communicating it. What about before that decision's made? The conversation around strategy, op model, a few different structural options. Where are we bringing people in?
Yeah, I think the first thing is really also about the business model you just pursue. If there is a change, as in my example, there was a change actually in what we were serving. So the business model there, eventually you have the operational team, but also the strategic team that is involved, just to try to also understand what's going on. And the second thing that I often find in my projects is the operating model, what the value chain looks like, the processes. And that's a perfect moment just to get people involved, because there they speak about what they are understanding or what they're living every day. It's not understanding, but they know and what they live every day. And there you can also get them on board.
They often have great suggestions on things to change.
Absolutely. If you have different levels of discussion, because some are very detailed and others are very comprehensive. So you need to sort that out. But afterwards, there are a lot of very interesting things that come in as for a better future of an organization. That's for sure.
A question we will ask for those leaders that are listening to the podcast. What's the one thing? I don't have time right now, maybe for a big transformation, but I do acknowledge that org design is important in my company. What is the one thing I can do to step up into better org design? Andreas, is there a kind of behavior or a culture or a way of doing things or a simple conversation that any and every leader could have to improve their organization structures or their thinking about their org design?
I think one major thing that we should never forget, also leaders in this position, is that organization is much more than an organigram.
Yeah.
And if you see that, it's always around, but it's just the surface, or it's not even the surface. It's just a small glimpse that we have, and we reduce the discussion. And I think to be aware, there's small and big things you can do, but just to create the awareness that organization is more comprehensive than just this little thing that is around everywhere, is a great thing actually to work towards their direction, where org design has then also the potential just to make changes or to get a better future there somewhere on the horizon. That I think that's an important thing. Just to be aware that the organization is much more those small things we see.
Yeah.
Andreas, you're a rare person who's sat on all sides of the table. You've been an academic, you're a consultant, you've also been a leader within an organization. Is there a consistent story you've heard in all those experiences you would love to share to wrap us up?
Yeah, the consistent thing is it's probably, is it negative? I don't know if it's negative, but there's always the issue of time around time and processes that I just described. They need time. Change needs time. If you want to, we're not talking about just, as I said, not about org charts, changing org charts, but we're working with the people that are in those organizations. And time is always scarce. Scarce, yeah. It's scarce. And I think this is one of the things that we found out, and the thing we should not lose just hope, or also our force to putting our force in, just trying to get time just to make those processes also possible. I think that's is to be found in academics somehow, because you're looking into studies that need to come to prove some hypothesis. You need time. Then it's also in consulting. It's always an issue, because things need to get done until a certain time point. And in management, of course, there is always pressure to get some results, and that's that. So time is a thing, and it's worth just to spend enough time on those issues.
Transformer consulting, we talked about at the start of the call. If I was listening to the podcast and thinking, actually, this is super interesting, how do I know that I'm a good fit for Transformer consulting? What are you typically working with? Where in the world are you working with leaders and companies? So that if someone's listening on the call and thinks, actually, I'm going to need some support in a change that I'm leading, or a transformation I'm leading, that they know you're right to reach out to, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you for this question. We're serving clients in Europe mostly, a lot in Switzerland, but also internationally. Then in South Africa, we're having some clients. And clients normally, typically, they come from a broad range of backgrounds, sectors. They normally are around, they can be small. There's small, interesting companies that are growing, which need a transformation in getting up certain steps of development, but also bigger companies that have a lot of products or services that they offer in different countries and have a certain complexity in their management. We offer a lot of international experiences and also know-how just to tackle those situations.
What size of organization are you typically working with in kind of headcount?
Typically, headcounts wise, they would be somewhere they're starting with 100, 150, going up to a few thousand.
Awesome. That's super helpful. We will, for our listeners, we will include in your author notes your contact details and a bit of a bio about you, so they can find you on Org Design Experts section of our site. Thank you so much for joining us today on the call all the way from Switzerland. It's been really great to meet you in Milan, and then also to have you on the podcast today. Amy, as always, thank you so much for co-hosting the podcast. Great to have you and your insights on the call. And to everyone else, have a great rest of the week. See ya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.